Welcome to True Revenge Stories, where betrayal meets justice. Today's story is about Emily Parker, a woman who endured years of pain and humiliation from her husband and his family, until she decided enough was enough. Stay tuned, because the way Emily turns her silence into revenge will leave you speechless. My name is Emily Parker, and for years I lived a life that looked perfect from the outside but was pure misery behind closed doors. I grew up in a small Midwestern town, the kind of place where neighbors waved at you from their porches and gossip spread like wildfire. I was raised to believe in patience, in loyalty, in standing by the people you love, no matter what. That belief almost destroyed me. When I met Daniel Miller, I thought I had found my dream man. He was charming, funny, and he made me feel special. Within a year we were married. I remember standing in my white dress, thinking, this is the beginning of my happily ever after. But happily ever after didn't last long. At first, Daniel's flaws seemed small. He'd snap at me if I forgot to iron his shirt or roll his eyes when dinner wasn't on time. I told myself it was stress from work, that things would get better. They didn't. The snapping turned into yelling. The yelling turned into insults. And soon the insults turned into bruises. Every time he hurt me, he'd cry afterwards saying, "I'm sorry, Emily. It won't happen again." But it always did. His family only made it worse. His mother, Margaret Miller, treated me like a burden. She'd sneer and say, "Daniel could have done better. What did Emily even bring into this marriage?" His sister Jessica mocked my clothes, my cooking, even the way I spoke. I felt trapped in a house where every door closed against me. But I stayed, convincing myself that things would eventually change. Then one night, everything shattered. Daniel thought I was asleep when his phone rang. I heard his voice, low and tender, so different from the way he ever spoke to me. "Just be patient, baby. I'll get rid of Emily soon. Then it'll be just you and me. Forever." Froze. My husband wasn't just cruel. He was planning to replace me. That night, lying in the dark, tears streaming silently down my face, something inside me broke. But it wasn't weakness. It was the silence snapping, turning into steel. I whispered to myself, "Emily Parker will no longer be the victim. She will be the storm." From that moment on, my revenge had begun. The morning after I overheard Daniel's phone call, I stood in the bathroom staring at my reflection. My eyes were swollen from crying, but behind them was a fire I hadn't seen before. I realized I couldn't simply walk away. Not yet. If I left quietly, Daniel would paint me as the villain. His family would destroy my name, and he'd move on to his mistress without consequences. I wasn't going to give him that easy escape. I began observing more closely, pretending to be the same timid Emily while secretly collecting information. I paid attention to his habits, his bank statements, his phone calls. I noticed the way he'd suddenly work late on Wednesdays and Fridays. I saw how his credit card charges didn't match his excuses. I started keeping a hidden journal, documenting everything. Times, dates, what he said, what he spent, who he called. Every word became a piece of evidence. Daniel never suspected. He thought I was broken, too weak to fight back. That was his first mistake. But my revenge wasn't just about him. His mother Margaret and sister Jessica had made my life unbearable. I wanted them to feel what I felt. Helpless, powerless, cornered. One afternoon, while Margaret was ranting about how ungrateful I was, she let slip something interesting. She mentioned how Daniel's promotion at work was largely thanks to her connections. She bragged that she'd helped cover up a little mistake he made with company funds. My ears perked up immediately. So Daniel wasn't just cheating on me, he was hiding financial secrets too. I knew then. His downfall would be far greater than just exposing his affair. That evening, while he showered, I carefully checked his briefcase. Inside were a few bank statements he must have been too careless to hide. And there it was. Transfers to an account I didn't recognize. Thousands of dollars. I quickly snapped photos with my phone, my hands trembling but steady enough to capture every page. The next step was Jessica. She spent most of her time flaunting her perfect life on social media. But one night, I overheard her fighting with someone on the phone. Her voice desperate, almost panicked. Curiosity pushed me to check her open laptop when she left the room. What I found stunned me. She was deep in credit card debt, and worse, she was secretly using Daniel's name to apply for loans. Fraud. I smiled for the first time in months. These people had dug their own graves. I just had to hand them the shovels. Still, I kept quiet. Revenge isn't about rushing. It's about timing. To the outside world, I remained the quiet wife. I still cooked, still cleaned, still endured their taunts. But inside, I was sharpening every weapon. I even played along with Daniel. When he lied about working late, I kissed his cheek and told him to be safe. When Margaret scolded me, I nodded humbly. When Jessica mocked me, I laughed softly. They thought I was beaten. But little did they know, every smile I gave was just another step in their destruction. I started building connections of my own. I reached out to a lawyer, secretly. I explained my situation, the abuse, the cheating, the financial fraud. He advised me to keep gathering evidence, and when the time was right, we'd strike hard. For the first time in years, I felt in control. And the best part, Daniel, Margaret, and Jessica had no idea their silent victim was about to become their greatest nightmare. Weeks passed, and my act of silence only made Daniel bolder. He no longer even tried to hide his late-night outings. Sometimes he wouldn't return home until morning, reeking of perfume that wasn't mine. Margaret excused his behavior, insisting he was working hard for his career. Jessica mocked me more openly, telling me maybe if I were more exciting, he wouldn't stray. I let them believe their lies. After all, arrogance makes people sloppy, and sloppy people are easy to destroy. One Friday evening, Daniel announced he was going on a business trip. I smiled sweetly and packed his suitcase, slipping a tiny GPS tracker inside his bag. He thought he was fooling me, but I knew exactly where he was going. A luxury hotel downtown, the same one he'd used before. I waited until he left, then made a call to a private investigator I had quietly hired weeks earlier. I gave him the hotel name and Daniel's schedule. By midnight, I had a folder of photos. Daniel and his mistress, tangled in each other's arms, walking into the hotel room, kissing in the lobby without shame. The images were damning. While my husband enjoyed his trip, I visited his study again. This time I found more evidence. Documents linking his secret bank transfers to offshore accounts. Money that wasn't just ours. Money that, from what I could tell, belonged to his company. Embezzlement. Copied everything. My phone now carried enough proof to ruin his career, his reputation, and his freedom. But revenge wasn't complete without Margaret and Jessica. One afternoon I invited Jessica out for coffee. She looked at me suspiciously at first. She wasn't used to me initiating anything, but her curiosity won. Over lattes, I pretended to be nervous and confided, "Jessica, I'm worried about Daniel. I found some loan applications with his name, but the handwriting looked different." Her face turned pale. She stammered, denying everything, but I knew I had struck a nerve. Later that night, I casually checked her purse while she showered. And there it was. Letters from collection agencies, threatening legal action. I took photos of them too. As for Margaret, she was more careful. But her pride was her weakness. At a dinner party, she boasted loudly about how she once helped Daniel fix a company audit, bragging about her connections that kept him from being fired. Several guests overheard her slip. I didn't need to expose her yet. She had already planted seeds of suspicion in others. By now, I had gathered everything. Proof of Daniel's affair. Evidence of financial fraud. Jessica's illegal loans. Margaret's cover-up. But I wasn't going to confront them in private. That would be too merciful. No, their downfall had to be public, undeniable, and unforgettable. So I waited. I played the perfect wife, the obedient daughter-in-law, the quiet sister-in-law. They never suspected I was setting the stage for their collapse. The opportunity arrived sooner than I expected. Daniel's company was hosting a grand charity gala, an event where the press, his colleagues, and even his bosses would attend. Margaret was ecstatic, boasting about how her son would shine in front of everyone. Jessica planned to show off her designer dress, pretending her life wasn't crumbling in debt. And me, I planned to deliver the opening blow of my revenge. On the night of the gala, as Daniel adjusted his tie in front of the mirror, I kissed his cheek and whispered, "You're going to have an unforgettable night." And he did. The ballroom glittered with chandeliers, violins, and the faint smell of expensive wine. Daniel walked in with me on his arm, confident as ever. His arrogance was blinding. He shook hands, kissed cheeks, and bragged about his latest business ventures. Margaret followed behind us like a queen, boasting about her son's success, while Jessica trailed, fishing for compliments on her glittering gown. I smiled politely, but inside I was electric. Every camera flash, every laugh, every toast brought us closer to the moment I had been waiting for. Daniel was set to give a speech that night. He loved attention, loved standing in the spotlight while everyone applauded his hard work. But this time the spotlight would burn him alive. As the evening moved along, I excused myself quietly and slipped into the media booth at the back of the room. A trusted ally was waiting, the private investigator I had hired. He had helped me put together a presentation, photos, bank statements, loan documents, and even an audio recording of Margaret's drunken bragging about covering up Daniel's fraud. Everything was ready. The gala reached its peak when Daniel's name was announced. He strode confidently onto the stage, microphone in hand, smiling as cameras flashed. "Thank you all for coming tonight," he began, his voice booming with false pride. I nodded to the investigator. With a single click, the projector screen behind Daniel flickered, and instead of the charity logo, an image appeared. A photo of Daniel kissing his mistress. The room went silent. Daniel froze. He turned, stammering, This isn't." But before he could finish, the next slide appeared. Bank statements. Transfers to hidden offshore accounts. Gasps erupted across the ballroom. His bosses shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The press scrambled for their cameras. Then came Jessica's loan documents, her signature on forged papers, her mounting debts. She screamed from the audience, "Emily, how dare you?" But no one was listening. Finally, Margaret's voice echoed through the speakers, her drunken confession. "I fixed the audit for my son. No one can touch us. We own this city." The room erupted in chaos. Guests whispered, reporters snapped photos, and Daniel's bosses stood furious. His career wasn't just over, it was annihilated. Daniel stumbled, sweat dripping from his forehead. "This is a setup. She's lying," he shouted, pointing at me. But no one believed him. The evidence was overwhelming, undeniable, and broadcast to hundreds of influential people in real time. I stood slowly, walking toward the stage. My heels clicked against the marble floor, echoing like a drumbeat of finality. When I reached him, I took the microphone from his trembling hands. "You thought my silence made me weak," I said, my voice steady, calm, yet cutting through the chaos. "But silence is power. Tonight, the truth speaks louder than your lies." The audience erupted in applause. For me, Daniel's company directors stormed out, declaring investigations would begin immediately. Reporters swarmed Margaret and Jessica, shoving cameras in their faces. Margaret tried to maintain her composure, but her reputation was in shreds. Jessica burst into tears, mascara streaking down her cheeks. And Daniel? He collapsed into a chair, pale and shaking, as security whispered about calling the authorities. I turned to leave, my head held high. I didn't need to watch them crumble further. Their downfall had only just begun. That night, while they faced humiliation, I felt free for the first time in years. Justice had finally arrived. But this was only the beginning of their ruin. The morning after the gala, the city's newspapers blazed with headlines. CEO exposed in charity scandal. Financial crimes uncovered at prestigious event. Family empire on the brink of collapse. Daniel's photo was everywhere. Disheveled, humiliated, a man caught with nowhere to run. Margaret's drunken recording had gone viral online, shared thousands of times within hours. Jessica's debt scams were splattered across gossip columns, dragging her through the mud. By noon the police came knocking. Daniel was still at home, drinking heavily, when the officers arrived. They carried a warrant, signed, sealed, undeniable. Fraud, embezzlement, tax evasion. He was handcuffed in front of the entire neighborhood. Cameras rolled as he shouted, "This is a mistake. I'm innocent." But his words carried no weight. Margaret tried to stop them, screaming at the officers, threatening to call her friends in high places. But the recording had stripped her of all influence. Every ally she once had now turned their backs on her. No one wanted to drown with a sinking ship. Jessica faced her own downfall when creditors showed up at her door. The forged loans she signed were now public knowledge. Debts piled up, lawsuits rained in, and her glamorous life collapsed overnight. Meanwhile, I watched it all from a safe distance. For years, I had endured their cruelty in silence, but now I was the one in control. The best part: I hadn't even done anything illegal. I had simply let the truth breathe. Within a week, Daniel lost everything. His company expelled him. His bank accounts were frozen. Investigations spread like wildfire, uncovering years of deceit. The man who once mocked me for being weak now begged his lawyers for a way out. But there was no way out. Margaret, once the respected matriarch, became a laughingstock. She couldn't step into a grocery store without whispers and stares. Her pride was her prison. Jessica, stripped of luxury, was left scrambling for survival. And me. I moved into a new apartment, overlooking the city skyline. For the first time in years, I slept peacefully without fear, without someone's shadow hanging over me. My scars were still there, but now they told a story of resilience, not defeat. One evening, as I stood on the balcony, I received a call from the investigator who had helped me. His voice carried a smile. "Emily, you should know. The DA is pressing full charges. Daniel could face up to 15 years. I closed my eyes, letting the weight of those words sink in. 15 years. 15 years for every insult, every bruise, every lie he had inflicted upon me. Justice had knocked, and it had answered loud. Still, I wasn't fueled by bitterness anymore. I didn't care to watch Daniel rot behind bars. What mattered was that he could never hurt me, or anyone else again. And so, I turned off my phone, poured myself a glass of wine, and whispered to the night sky. Silence was my weapon. But revenge was my victory. Months passed after Daniel's arrest. The trial became one of the city's most watched court cases. Every detail of his crimes was laid bare. The embezzlement, the false charity donations, the offshore accounts. Witnesses testified against him, including former employees who had once been too scared to speak. The courtroom was packed the day the verdict was read. I sat quietly in the back, my heart steady. When the judge's gavel struck and Daniel was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison, the entire room gasped. Daniel's face drained of all color. For the first time in his life, he had no control, no power, no way to manipulate the outcome. Margaret and Jessica didn't attend. By then, their social circle had abandoned them. They were bankrupt, bitter, and living in the shadows of the empire they had once ruled. As for me, I walked out of that courtroom not just free from Daniel, but free from the chains of silence that had bound me for years. I began rebuilding my life slowly. I went back to school, finishing the degree I had put on hold when I married Daniel. I started volunteering at women's shelters, sharing my story, not as a tale of pain, but as proof that resilience could turn even the darkest past into strength. There were nights when memories still haunted me, but they no longer held power. Instead, they fueled me. I had transformed from a woman who whispered in fear into a woman who spoke with courage. One evening, as I closed my laptop after finishing a paper for class, I thought about the life I once lived. The mansion, the wealth, the false smiles. None of it mattered anymore. What mattered was peace. What mattered was freedom. I poured myself a cup of tea, sat by the window, and whispered with a smile. Silence gave me strength. Revenge gave me freedom. And freedom gave me life. And that, dear viewers, was the story of Emily Parker. A woman who endured cruelty, but rose with courage and turned her silence into a weapon of justice. At True Revenge Stories, we bring you tales where betrayal meets justice, where the weak become strong, and where revenge is not just bitter, but it is sweet. If Emily's journey moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Hit the bell icon so you never miss another powerful story of courage and retribution. Because here at True Revenge Stories, every story deserves its moment of sweet revenge.